Let's dive right into this, because today's explainer feels way less like standard history and a lot more like a dark, gritty, cinematic epic. Picture this, it's the late 12th century. The Mediterranean is this incredibly volatile chessboard of empires, right? And a single catastrophic shipwreck is about to completely redraw the map. We're going to explore how a freak weather event accidentally forged a Crusader kingdom, a kingdom defined by heavy stone, clanking chainmail, and brutal conquest that would end up ruling for 300 years. I actually want to start right here with this incredibly raw quote from the Cypriot chronicler Neophytus. He called King Richard I of England, the legendary Richard the Lionheart, the wretch. And you might be wondering why. Well, in April 1191, Richard's massive Crusader fleet was sailing eastward when this absolute freak storm struck right near Cyprus. Ships were blown violently off course, completely smashing against the Cypriot coastline. It was a total disaster, and it sparked a chain reaction of violence and conquest that nobody saw coming.
Part 1. The Accidental Conquest.
What makes this whole thing so fascinating is that Richard had absolutely zero intention of conquering Cyprus. None. His ultimate target was Saladin and the city of Jerusalem for the Third Crusade. But fate intervened. When his shipwrecked survivors washed ashore, the rogue Byzantine governor, Isaac Komnenos, didn't offer them shelter. Instead, he seized them. He plundered their supplies, and most egregiously, when a ship carrying Richard's sister and his fiancée entered the port, Isaac actually refused them fresh water. He essentially took the royal family hostage. And in doing so, he provoked the absolute wrath of the foremost warrior of the age.
Part 2. Landing at Limassol. On May 6, 1191, Richard arrived at Limassol demanding his people and his treasure back. When Isaac arrogantly refused, Richard didn't even hesitate. To really grasp the sheer terror of that moment for the defenders, you have to consider the overwhelming scale of the English armada bearing down on the coast. We're talking 150 large ships, carrying heavy infantry and massive siege engines, 53 galleys built for rapid tactical maneuvering right up to the shoreline, and 3 heavily guarded treasure ships, carrying the financial backing for an entire holy war.
Forget the shiny, full-plate armor of later centuries. This was the brutal, heavy reality of the 12th century war machine. Imagine a deadly rain of English arrows clearing the beach, and Richard himself leaping straight into the surf. He's wearing knee-length clanking chainmail, split for riding, a conical helmet with a sharp nasal guard, and hauling a massive kite shield. Underneath all that metal, thick quilted felt acted as surprisingly effective armor. In fact, Muslim chroniclers noted Crusaders looking literally like pincushions, with arrows just sticking out of their felt surcoats while the men fought on completely unharmed.
The battle was an absolute rout. Isaac's forces fled into the hills, but Richard relentlessly tracked him down. This conquest was so breathtakingly swift that just days later, on May 12th, Richard married Berengaria, right there in Limassol, crowning her Queen of England. They celebrated with the local sweet wine, Commandaria, which Richard famously dubbed the Wine of Kings. And as for Isaac Komnenos, well, he surrendered, asking only that he not be bound in iron chains. Richard, displaying a pretty dark sense of humor, actually honored the request by binding him in chains made of solid silver.
Part 3. The Templar Interregnum.
Having conquered this incredibly strategic island, Richard faced a major logistical nightmare. He was a crusader on a tight timetable, desperate to reach the Holy Land, and he really couldn't afford to leave a massive garrison behind. So he decided to cash out. The Knights Templar agreed to buy the island of Cyprus lock, stock, and barrel for 100,000 Syrian Byzants. To put that massive number into perspective, based on bullion weight, that is roughly equivalent to 19 million US dollars today.
The Templars paid an initial installment of 40,000 Byzants, but they were immediately underwater on their mortgage. And this sets up a really grim contrast. See, the Templars were nominally holy warrior monks, but on Cyprus, they operated a lot more like aggressive predatory bankers. They had to extract immense wealth from the local population just to pay off their massive debt. And here is the truly terrifying part. There were only about 20 Templar knights garrisoning an island of nearly 100,000 deeply resentful locals. It was a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
Part 4. The Easter Massacre. The atmosphere under the Templars was oppressive, heavily taxed, and culturally hostile. By the spring of 1192, it finally reached a breaking point. By early April, rumors were swirling of a coordinated Cypriot plot to massacre the tiny Latin garrison. On Easter Day, April 11, the terrified Templars retreated and barricaded themselves inside Nicosia Castle. Realizing they were vastly outnumbered and that negotiations were totally useless, the heavily armed knights made a desperate, horrifying decision. At dawn, they stormed out of the castle gates and initiated a merciless slaughter, killing civilians indiscriminately in the streets. This show of sheer force broke the rebellion, but it traumatized the Templars so deeply they practically begged Richard to take the island back.
Part 5. The Lusignan Kingdom.
Richard actually agreed to take it back, conveniently keeping their 40,000 Byzant down payment, of course, but this left Cyprus in a power vacuum once again. Enter Guy de Lusignan. He was a dispossessed Frankish nobleman who had recently lost the kingdom of Jerusalem to Saladin. And Guy didn't come alone. He brought what's known as the Palestinian diaspora. This was a massive wave of battle-hardened Frankish knights, nobles, and merchants who had just lost their mainland estates. By granting them extensive feudal estates in exchange for military service, Guy systematically colonized Cyprus. By 1197, it was officially recognized as a kingdom, the ultimate bastion of Western European feudalism in the Eastern Mediterranean.
To govern this new realm permanently, they imported the Assizes of Jerusalem. This was a massive, highly complex collection of old French legal treatises. It rigidly structured the entire society, creating a high court for the newly minted Frankish nobles and a lower court for commoners. It wasn't just a set of rules, it was an entire legal architecture specifically designed to permanently embed a Latin elite right over the local population.
The day-to-day reality of the society was one of strict social stratification. The Latin Catholic minority lived mostly in fortified cities like Nicosia and Famagusta, holding absolute political and military power, while the Greek Orthodox majority remained largely out in the countryside. But the Lusignans were surprisingly pragmatic. To prevent another Templar-style uprising, they allowed a certain degree of autonomy. They permitted the Greeks to maintain their own rural ecclesiastical courts and even translated legal texts into the local Greek dialect. It was a delicate, incredibly complex balancing act of military occupation and cultural integration.
But make no mistake, this was still a heavily militarized occupation, and absolutely nothing symbolizes that better than Colossi Castle. Built by military orders who were granted land by the Lusignans, it is an absolute beast of a building. It's an impenetrable 3-story stone keep, with walls up to 40 meters across. It was designed with deep crenellations for defending archers, projecting raw, immovable Western power right into the Cypriot landscape. It was a fortress designed to protect not just the knights themselves, but their incredibly lucrative sugarcane plantations that practically funded the entire kingdom.
So we are left with this incredible thought to ponder. A sudden change in the wind, a freak Mediterranean storm blowing a single fleet off course, directly resulted in a visceral coastal conquest, a brutal massacre, and the totally accidental creation of the Lusignan kingdom. A formidable Crusader state of clanking chainmail, imposing stone castles, and strict feudal law that would end up dominating the Levant for the next 300 years. It truly goes to show how one single chaotic moment can entirely rewrite history. I hope this explainer leaves you hungry to learn more about the gritty, fascinating reality of the medieval Mediterranean. Until next time.